One of the greatest things about being in the fandom is that community aspect. The fact that you can get together with like-minded people, share your thoughts, and even bounce ideas that you might have not even considered if you didn't have those interactions. But there's always those certain topics in a community that fans just seem to be divided on no matter how many times they get brought up. And we're gonna go through some of those today. I'll start off with one that's pretty heavy. Fate Zero is the best Fate out of all of them. This is one that's been circling for a long time. Considering the success of Kara no Kyokai, you can just imagine how ecstatic Fate fans were to find out that Ufotable would be doing Fate Zero and to see that they would finally be getting the adaptation that they deserve. However, this led many of the Fate newcomers at that time to Fate Zero being their introduction to the franchise. And so to see how great Fate Zero turned out as an adaptation after the fact, many people vouch that Fate Zero is the best there was, there is, and there ever will be to the end of time. And this caused a lot of back and forth in between the fandom, where the OG fans, the original Stay Night fans, started to label these supporters as secondaries. People who didn't enjoy the original Fate Stay Night content, be that the novel or the original Fate Stay Night anime, or people that would watch Fate Zero and they would watch literally nothing else. They wouldn't try anything else, and even if they did try it, they would say that it wouldn't match up to the caliber of quality that Fate Zero put out. These supporters usually don't like FGO or anything about it. They don't like Apocrypha and they don't like Stay Night. For a long time, Zero has been known for its interesting characters, its questions about philosophy, the dark elements, and being able to weave so many things at one time while still keeping it consistent and thorough to what the story is actually about. And because of that, many people of the series wouldn't give other parts of Fate or Type Moon a chance because now they believe that's what Fate is all about, when really it was merely just an aspect of Fate the entire time. But they never would have known that because they never took the time to familiarize themselves with the original work. They find everything else in the verse lackluster, and their opinions come off as superficial to the other side of the fandom because their arguments about maturity or the lack of philosophical concepts shouldn't break their ability to consume something else, especially considering that they are there, it's just not as spelt out. For the next one, we have one that you could say is equally as bad, but I would call infinitely worse, and that is, who is the best out of the three main heroines? Now this is a conversation that I've seen since I've gotten into the fandom. It never ends. It's really more so the fans just busting each other's chops, but there will always be a discussion of who's the best main lead, Saber, Sakura, or Rin. Oftentimes when this conversation gets brought up, many people that like the cope will just say things like, oh, that conversation doesn't matter, or just like whoever you want to like. But on a realistic note, one character has to be written better than the others, and facts don't care about your feelings. But the problem with the entire argument is that objectively, you would be basing the best of the three off your own personal values. So if you're a person that values love and family, you're probably not gonna like Saber as much because the whole thing around her abandoning Mordred and being so dead focused on her goals. If you're the type of person that likes a character that's more involved, you're probably not gonna like Sakura as much because majority of her story revolves around that not being accessible to her, and that's a huge point in her background, one that fans often hold against her as just some type of damsel in distress. If you're the type of person that likes the underdog, you might not like Rin as much because the foundation of her character was set up around her sister being sacrificed in order for her to succeed. Just understand that while Rin didn't start from the typical scratch bottom, she had things like money and connections taken care of. She did grow up without a mom, a father, and a sister, and she was raised by a psychopath, so it wasn't exactly a cakewalk either. You have to understand that people will compare Saber, Sakura, and Rin until the end of time. They will compare their pseudo servants, they will compare their outfits, they'll compare their dialogue. It doesn't matter, it's always been a thing. Some people might even throw Ilya and Kirei in there. It's just one of those things in the fandoms that just have to be. It's integral to being a Fate fan. Realistically, there is no right answer. It's just who you relate to the most. By the way, it's Saber. Anyway, getting into our third controversial topic, we have have the Banquet of Kings, where the three kings, Saber, Iskander, and Gil, meet up and talk about ideals and how they would rationalize a certain situation, but more specifically how Gil and Iskander felt about Saber wanting to redo her reign, and them both making a mockery of her for her wanting to change things, saying that's not a true kingly way. The both of them felt like, I did what I did and that's it, and if you feel a way about it, that's too bad. And if you're watching this for the first time without context, many people in the fandom agreed with Iskander and Gil for the longest time, and they still do. But as you further familiarize yourself with the background of Saber and how things really went down in Camelot, you'll realize that they aren't qualified to speak on Saber's experience because her experience is her own. Other than them also being kings, the way that she went down was completely different to everybody else, one that they've still yet to witness. And so this later started to cause a divide in, maybe Saber was right in her own way, but the narrative really tries to push the idea that she's wrong. It really doesn't give her a foundation for the conversation being neutral. It more so comes off as Gil and Iskander just dogpiling her. Still an incredible scene regardless. It's just that now many people find the way that it was written to be unjust. For our fourth topic here, we have the conversation about Kariya. Now, initially getting into Fate Zero, Kariya stands for a lot of good things, and you might even see his pursuit to save Sakura even after leaving his family and coming back to be one that is noble, especially considering who he was under. Zoken is just a vile person to begin with, and it makes you want to champion his decisions. But again, later on down the road, many people have broken Kariya down, myself included. I did an entire video on this, that Kariya isn't nearly as benevolent as people try to make him out to be initially. It's not all justice, and that's the entire point of the characters in Fate Zero to begin with. They're supposed to draw you. A lot of people thought Kariya was this straight-laced guy, when really, just like the transitions that you see in his face, you can see in his character as he slowly starts to get further into the war. His obsession with Tokiomi, the fact that he choked out Ren's mother in cold blood, the fact that he tried to use Aoi's children for his own personal gain beyond trying to save them. Not to say that he wasn't trying to save them, but there was a much bigger picture at play that didn't get distinguished at the beginning. For the next one, you have Ren saving Shinji in the UB-Dub route. Now, this is one of the lesser known topics. It was a very interesting thing for Ren to do character-wise, considering the type of person that Shinji was. For many reasons, people think that Shinji is by far one of the most vile people on the cast, and for good reason. So for many, it was really off-putting to see that she would still save him when in that very same route, he tried to take advantage of her against her will, until Ku stepped in and stopped him. Many people also felt the way that she would save Shinji, where she would clearly be risking her life, but she wouldn't risk her life to save her sister Sakura. It obviously shows that Ren isn't a bad person, considering that she's willing to save even the most devilish of existence if he's in trouble right in front of her face. But she does have her own flaws that she admits to many times in the story itself. For our next topic, you have the scene where Gil took out Ilya. He had his fight with Heracles, and once he was finished, he actually used one of his swords to slice out both of Ilya's eyes and blind her, and then take her core to use as a foundation for summoning the Greater Grail. Again, super back and forth on opinions. I've seen many people say Gil is just being Gil. He's such a bad person. Why does he always do this? And again, once you familiarize yourself more with the content, you'll realize that Ilya isn't nearly as vulnerable as the story makes her out to be. For one, she has this younger appearance, so it makes it look like he's doing it to somebody of youth, when really Ilya is older than Shirou. The other things are that the more you look at content like the bad ends, where you have Ilya straight up flattening out Shirou's legs and turning him into a doll and have Heracles throw him across the entire area just for the fun of it, and I've covered this here on the channel, that kind of started to change the way that people viewed Ilya. There's even a canon part of the Fate route, this isn't a bad end, where Ilya told Heracles that he could have his way with Saber and Ren if he could get a hold of them. Flat out. It was around the time where they were having the fight in the forest. So these days, it's more of, is Gil a bad guy? Because now people are saying that Ilya deserves it. Then you have others saying that he blinded her so she didn't have to fully witness him taking the life of Heracles. At least she didn't have to continue seeing it. So I've seen that argument as well. The next one we got is the Deen versus Ufotable conversation. A lot of people think Deen is a horrible studio. They think that is a bad adaptation and that Ufotable should be the only studio to ever touch a Fate work, period. And then later on down the line, you can see with things like Babylonia that it is very possible for other studios to get a hold of Fate content and do a great job. So when it comes to Deen, I can't speak on the UB-Dub movie because holy. But when it comes to the show, I am of the camp that the Deen adaptation wasn't even all that bad, especially for the time that it came out. Kind of crazy to think about, I know. Deen came out in 06 and then adaptations like Karo no Kyokai coming out in 07 completely blowing it out of the water. For Deen, it just feels like it came at a bad time. It was the only adaptation people had at the time, so many people probably just accepted it for what it was. They were just happy to have a Fate adaptation in general. Then you got the other side asking, why are you mixing all of the routes plus adding things that aren't supposed to be there? Now you're gonna have the mass majority thinking that the story isn't as great as it actually is and we're just gassing it. But they'll never know this because you can't push a novel, but you can push an adaptation. It's just way more accessible. Not to mention the novel to this day never came to the West anyway. As far as Ufotable goes, there's a lot of people that think the studio is super flash over substance at times, and while it does aesthetically look amazing, that kind of detracts from the story as well. I myself love the fight of Shirou versus Gil in the Deen adaptation, one of the only things I like from the movie, because it seems like an actual fight. And then in Ufotable, it kind of seems like a bunch of flashes and explosion and Gil is just standing there. At least in Deen, he tried to fight back. Things like that, in that regard, it was just way better. A lot of people admit that they can see the differences in the choreography between Fate Zero and Fate Stay Night. If you notice and you pay attention, the way the choreography happens in the scenes are totally different. Different directors. Fate Stay Night is kind of in your face and upbeat. Fate Zero is real slow and well thought out. Not to say that either one is better, but they each have their own flavor to them, and you never know what you're gonna get. I will say the choreography did get a lot better by the time that Heaven's Field came out though. For our next topic, we have one that circles back around to Zero, and that's the fact of Tokiomi abandoning one of his children altogether. As you guys know, Tokiomi had two choices. He could either abandon one of his children and have them go over to another family and potentially have a good life, that way they both win, or he could have the Mages Association get involved and have them put his kids in formaldehyde and use them as lab studies. So considering that he really didn't want the latter, he ends up abandoning Sakura and she goes to the Matou household in hopes that she would also have a good life just on the other side of the spectrum. And a lot of people feel a way about Tokiomi for this, saying he's a horrible father, when in his eyes, he literally did the best thing he possibly could from a mage's point of view. Now, when you first see him do this, you might think Tokiomi is the worst father you could possibly meet in the Nasuverse. But you'll come to find that as you start to take in more Fate material, things like Case Files, Tsukihime, Tokiomi is sadly on the better side of the parents. It can get way worse, and it's not even close. So in these discussions, that's one of the many things that I've always seen a love and hate divide in regards to Tokiomi's character, especially if you consider addendums like the Servant Universe, where he's not nearly as bad of a father because he wasn't put in that type of position. but you know how I feel. He's still a hoe regardless. For the next one, we have another from Zero, and that is Kirei and Kiritsugu are both horrible people. As characters, many people define them to be brilliant, the way that they contrast and they serve their purpose in the story really well, but it's said that even if you consider the fact, you can't overlook how many bad things they've done. Like the ends don't justify the means. All the people Kiritsugu has taken out in cold blood just to fuel his dream, the fact that Kirei is a natural born psychopath, so he never had a chance to feel empathy, though as human beings with morals and standards, you still have to hold it against him, because how could you let such a monster be on the loose? If this was a person in real life, you wouldn't think twice about him. You lock him up and throw away the key. But as a person of fiction, there's often times where I've seen people say that these are some of their favorite characters, and a lot of people really just don't understand them, and they stand for so much more than the story gives them credit for. It's just that type of dynamic. And then going into the next one, you have the ideology surrounding Shirou and Emiya. A lot of people really just don't buy into what they think. No matter how many times it gets shown, they just feel like Shirou is foolish. I've even seen people say that Emiya is a coward and a crybaby because he spent the entire story coming back to complain about making the wrong choice. And that's the whole foundation of his character. I've witnessed some crazy arguments. Honestly, their characters are exactly what you make of them, and like I was mentioning with the outlook on Saber Rin and Sakura, it's really where you hold your values. If you're a type of person that's realistic, there's no way that you could dance with their ideology because it kind of goes against the grain of that, right? An untainted soul that still wants the best of everybody, even though they've seen the world for what it truly is. When in modern times, and in any time for that matter, that's just not the way that life works. Looking at our next one, and I might as well be throwing a Molotov at my mic with this one. Any novels attached to the Fate works are overrated. Now, I can understand somebody coming at this angle. Me personally, I think they stand up to what a lot of people have been saying that they are. But at the same time, expectation is a real thing. So when you're constantly gassing something and trying to shove it down people's throat, and then it's not exactly like you framed it, they're gonna give you the worst response imaginable. That's why I say I understand that you really like the series and you want other people to like the series, but you gotta calm down. Just say it was good and tell people to check it out. You don't gotta be like, oh, it's a masterpiece, because then they're gonna walk in expecting it to be a masterpiece. A masterpiece means nothing's wrong. Zero. Zilch. So when you say things like this, you build up this expectation that shouldn't be there. The other thing about this conversation is the time. Now I understand if you don't have the time, that's cool, that's fine. It's just the idea when people say, well, I don't have 60 hours to play a game, and then they go play another game for 8 to 12 hours in a day. It's like, I thought you didn't have time. Which one is it? Is it you don't have time or you don't want to have time? That's where it gets weird to me. Because a big problem with these same people is that a lot of them are the first ones to say that Fate doesn't make sense. Like you literally chose to be ignorant about the context and then turn around and say that the series doesn't make sense, it has a ton of plot holes, and it's lacking in foundation, but you chose to do this for like 10 hours straight, but you don't have time. Case in point, dudes will farm FGO for 10 hours straight and then not read it. It's like, brother, the story is right there. Oh, I can't be bothered reading it. I got way too much to do. You just farm for 600 minutes. You can't have that much to do. When you farm, you literally do nothing but the same thing over and over again. But actually going through the story, preposterous. I've always found that to be hilarious. And then finally, you have Shirou's decision in Heaven's Field. Now, there's a bunch of choices that are necessary to be made throughout the story, but most of the bigger choices come towards the end in that route. And one of those is allowing Sakura to live. Oftentimes, you'll hear people say Shirou is foolish for doing doing this? Why would you let her live knowing what she'll become? You even had the scene where Kirei exposed that Sakura is in part getting a kick out of getting her revenge. Why does everybody cut her loose just because of the background? They are understandable claims. The way the story frames it, it's just hard to rationalize giving up on somebody when they're right in front of you, especially if you grew up with them or they raised you. We've had this conversation in Discord. It got real heavy, where one of my guys were saying, I wouldn't hesitate to put Sakura down. And it's like, yeah, but what if this is a person you love? He immediately said, I'd still do it. Well, it would probably be harder. If you have somebody in your immediate family that's strung out, all of a sudden, that's not something that you want to do to them. It's not. You know, it might be for the greater good. If it comes to the point where that person is a serial whatever, you're gonna think twice about it. You might do what has to be done, but that's a hard decision to make. So it's kind of crazy not to empathize why Shirou was so frustrated when he was holding the knife over Sakura. It's just one of those situations. Those are just some of them. Of course, we'll be getting into some others from other series. And if you have some that I didn't mention, topics that you feel are super controversial, feel free to drop those in.